to the Family Addiction Recovery Podcast. I'm Christine, and this is my better half, Rick Dixon. And we are here tonight with our guests, Mark Kastleman, Lindsay, and Terry Allred. And we're so grateful for them joining us. We're going to talk a little bit about Step 3 tonight. And I'm super excited that we're also going to talk about pornography addiction and sex addiction. And we try in these podcasts to blend the voices of the addicted, the family member, and then have a clinician and a counselor with us. And Mark Castleman tonight will provide that role. Their stories are so impactful, and we are so grateful that they're willing to be vulnerable. I mean, I think pornography is probably the most shaming of all addictions. And yet it's so important that everyone understands that it's the chemicals in the brain that are produced are exactly like any substance or behavioral addiction. It's the same chemicals in the brain, and in fact, a few more, if I'm not mistaken, and Mark will cover that. But I'd like to turn the time over to Rick. Can you introduce Step 3 and why we love Step 3 so much, and I'll help with that. And then maybe introduce our guest tonight.
You betcha. You know, Step 3 is, Christy, your favorite step.
It is
you
my
love
favorite
it.
step.
And she's been so excited to talk about this. Step 3 is decide to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God, the Eternal Father, and His Son, Jesus Christ. We're going to talk about that. But first, what we want to do is we want to introduce our guests, and they will share their stories and how Step 3 is intertwined with their personal story. And we're just going to have a wonderful discussion. Hopefully it will be motivating and helpful for those who are struggling with addiction, sex addiction, pornography addiction, and those family members who are greatly affected.
Especially the spouses. I think it's really important tonight that we include betrayal trauma, and we remember the spouses as well.
Right. So let me introduce first off Terry and Lindsay. As husband and wife, they're a blended family. They have 6 kids between the two of them. This is what's interesting. Years ago, Lindsay struggled with a chemical addiction, and it took her down some dark places, and she'll share her personal story. It cost her her marriage. She had to give her kids up for a while because of the addiction. Luckily, she worked through it, and she has been clean and sober for years, and found Terry, and they have been married for some time, and are doing very well.
And just really quickly, and the fun thing about Lindsay and Terry is they are doing we do the weekly family education groups that we do, and they are doing the couples recovery group on Thursday nights. And so I'm excited for you all to get to know them a little bit better.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So Terry struggled with his own addiction, sexual addiction, which contributed and cost him his first marriage. So here's 2 people who struggled with their own addiction such that it cost a marriage. Yet they both have worked their recovery. Both have been clean and sober for quite some time. Both found each other, and boy, they have got an incredible story of hope and healing. And so we'll be hearing from them and asking them questions and really having them provide some hope and healing for us. So it's going to be neat. Now, Mark Kastleman is a man that I've known for years and years. Here's a man that struggled with his own addiction as well, pornography and sex addiction, for over 30 years. He is now doing incredible things in this field. I chose to read a little bit of his credentials so you can see the power that we have in this podcast. Listen to this. Mark is an internationally acclaimed speaker, trainer. He's an author. Mark is a board certified clinical chaplain and pastoral counselor with a specialty in addiction recovery. He has worked with leading brain scientists and psychologists in developing education and training programs used worldwide, and has personally mentored struggling individuals in over 80 countries. Mark is successful in successful long-term recovery of over 30 years, battling his own addiction, as I mentioned. Mark is currently the program director for Reclaim, an intensive outpatient program for pornography and sexual addiction, and it's located in Sandy. As an author, this is the book that he wrote, the Pornography Paradox. Let me just mention some bullet points so you can see the caliber of individual and the type of book that this is. Sexual shame is a religious culture. Boy, oh boy, that can really drive an addiction. Sex as a substitute for connection with others. It's not about sex. It's about looking for other things, and Mark will talk a little bit about that. The science behind why we act out sexually. Pornography use is substance abuse. It is an addiction. Am I beyond saving? Many feel after a while, boy, I can't be saved. And that's a myth. On and on. There's a lot of powerful things in here. But Mark, we're grateful to have you be here and share your story as well, and provide some insight as a counselor as well. So with that,
why don't we review the steps real quick, because we are on step 3.
Yes.
And so the first steps we talked about, step 1, where we come to recognize that I'm powerless over for the family member perspective, I'm powerless over the addiction of a loved one, and my life is becoming unmanageable. And for the person with the addiction, come to recognize that I'm powerless over my addiction, and my life is becoming unmanageable. Step 2 is where we come to believe that the power of God can restore us, take us back to sanity. We call that spiritual and emotional health. Step 3, the step that we're on tonight, which I love so much because it's the pressure release valve. It just removes so much pressure off of us, is when we make that decision that we're going to turn our life and our will over to God. However we define that. For me, it's God and His Son Jesus Christ. So step 3 was so powerful for me as a family member. I had so much fear, and I know a lot of you spouses and a lot of you moms and dads out there, when you have a loved one addiction, there is a lot of fear. There's a lot of negative emotion that comes with trying to control the uncontrollable. So when our sons were struggling 15 years ago, and we started attending 12-step meetings, and I saw step 3, turn my life and my will over. That meant that I had to trust in my higher power. And that was really scary for me, because I didn't know at that point in time, I didn't know if God would actually save my sons from their addiction. And so I thought I had to be the backup plan. And as I started going to meetings, and I started to see that by my kind of letting go and letting God is how they talk about it in Al-Anon, but just kind of stepping back and letting God start to work with them one-on-one, things started to go so much better. As I worked my steps and I answered the question from each step, it's like I had so much fear, but it kind of helped my faith to go up and then my fear to go down. And I just wanted to share one quick story just to bring in the feeling and the essence of the power of step 3. My son, and you met them, Preston and Tyson, in the first 2 podcasts, but Tyson, I had put him in a special high school because, the first high school I felt like, he's got these bad friends. So I'm going to put him in another high school so he can get good friends, right? But I had a phone call. The school was about ready to kick him out of the high school. And he will share the story with you. But I was very concerned. And as a mom, I was actually pretty devastated. And I remember meeting my dad for lunch. And we were sitting down having lunch together. And I was kind of talking to my dad. I was a little concerned. And at the time, actually, he was living with my dad, because I think Rick and Tyson were kind of butting heads a little bit. Rick was really big, tough love back then. I was the enabler. The house was just, totally, we were dysfunctional, in shambles, right? So I'm meeting with my dad, and we thought living with my dad is such a great man. He's totally non-judgmental, has so much charity, and we're having lunch, and I could tell he was worried about me, and he looked at me and he said, listen, he said, I don't want you to worry about Tyson. He said, you let me worry about Tyson. And I just remember thinking in my mind, wow, well, that's easy for you to say, but as a mom, I'm struggling so bad. But I took my lunch, and we were kind of in a cafeteria type place, and I stood up to take my tray, and I walked it over, and I set my tray down, and I went to leave, and as I took a couple of steps, I had such a powerful spiritual feeling hit me right here in my chest. It literally stopped me. I took a step and I stopped, and I had this strong spiritual, just powerful feeling. And I remember thinking, whoa, what does this mean? What are you trying to say to me? And I had the distinct impression that God was saying to me, don't worry about Tyson. Let me worry about Tyson. And it was such a powerful breakthrough for me to be able to start trusting Heavenly Father. Because before then, I didn't know how to trust. I believed, but I didn't know how to trust. And it also helped me to know that I felt like there was some pain. When we suffer and we don't have the power, and God has the power, and He watches us. He watches His daughter suffer or His son suffer. Maybe it pains Him as well. I had a feeling that it does cause Him some pain. So I started to think about that, and I thought, I can do this. I need to turn it over. And as I did, and I started trusting a little more and a little more, it's like those tender mercies just stacked on top of each other. And then there was just this strong faith that I could let go and let God. So that's kind of my story.
Step 3.
With step 3.
That you can see why step 3 is her favorite.
Yeah, it took
step.
off all the pressure.
It was really hard for her to be able to turn it over.
And it's a process.
And for moms, and I think for wives as well.
And it's a process, but as we work those steps, and we're answering, and we're really doing that work one-on-one with the Lord, He knows our weaknesses, and He will help us. And I think it's a gift of grace. Mm-hmm. It's a little gift of grace.
So with that, let's go ahead and let's start with you, Lindsay. Maybe you could share your story. How you feel you'd want to share it. Your dark times, your recovery, your hope, and just what you feel from the heart. What happened?
Yeah, thank you. I was born in California to a mom and a dad that were really great parents. I had a really great childhood. I was an only child, so that was different, and good and bad. I remember always asking them, Mom, Dad, will you have another, have more kids? I just remember feeling really lonely. And I think that's really what that was about, is I felt really alone a lot. From the time I can remember, I felt really alone. And so that was kind of an ongoing thing. But I went to church every Sunday. We went on family vacations all the time. I swam competitively and got good grades. And I had a pretty typical childhood. And there was no abuse, no trauma, no big events. And I always like to point that out, because I feel like a lot of times when you're talking, with a group of people that struggle with different addictions, you do hear about a lot of trauma. And that does come up a lot. But for me, there wasn't. And that actually created, for me, a lot more shame. And I felt even worse about myself, because I just thought, well, there's no trauma. Everybody else here that I know has all this trauma, and I don't. And I had all these opportunities, and this is where I'm at. And so it really was hard for me. But the more I learn, now in recovery, there was a lot of emotional dishonesty for sure. And we didn't talk about feelings. And I remember from the time from just a small child, I remember that my mom would do this thing where she would just kind of laugh at me. And she still sometimes does that, and it really hurts my feelings. And there are things that I'm taking seriously, like, Mom, hey, I got a new job. Mom, hey, I got engaged. And so I feel kind of humiliated and ashamed, and like something's wrong. And that's something that I grew up with, from the time I can remember as well. My parents got divorced when I was 12, and that's really where things started to go downhill. I don't remember feeling angry, though. But as I was talking to my parents about it recently, they reminded me that I was pretty angry initially. And I didn't want to go to my dad's house. And I read this letter. It was like a journal entry, and it was saying how I just kind of lost it. And I started yelling at my mom. I think it was at my mom, and saying that I didn't want to go to my dad's house only if my best friend, Jessica, would come with me. And so that was kind of a thing that was going on. But then I, had other things happen, and I was kind of hitting puberty, and things just kind of started to blow up. I went from straight A's and this ultra competitive swimmer and, a pretty, I thought pretty good self-concept and confidence, but really not, to basically flunking out of school. And I hadn't talked to my mom in about 2 years. When I was maybe 15. We had no relationship at that point. And my dad got remarried when I was 15 and was married for about 6 months, and then got remarried again, got divorced and then got remarried again a year after that. And my addiction that's where it took off. And I started doing just kind of what I think a lot of teenagers do. I started with smoking weed and cigarettes, and I thought, smoking cigarettes would be a cool thing to do. And I really wanted to fit in. I so desperately remember wanting to just fit in, because I remember always feeling like I just never quite fit in. I never quite belonged. And that's still something that I struggle with sometimes today, is a feeling of not belonging. And so I started to progress in my addiction, and I dropped out of high school my junior year, and I got a DUI, and I went to these treatment centers, and I just really struggled. I got married when I was 19 and had my first child then. I actually placed my first child for adoption, and that was probably the most painful experience of my life. And he is almost 17 now. I got to see him for the first time about a year ago, which was really cool.
Wow.
And that was definitely a blessing of recovery. To be able to see my son with his mom and his sister, and to see what a great young man he had become because of a decision I had made, 16 years ago, and in conjunction with his awesome parents and his awesome spirit, was a miracle. And so that was really just such a blessing. And I do believe that there are certain events and certain things that happen in our lives, and they're crossroads. And I believe that when these crossroads happen, we get to choose what we're going to do. And we can either go left or we can go right. We can either do it our way or we can do it the Lord's way. And I feel like with the adoption, as hard as it was and as scary as it was, I decided to go the Lord's way. And it was painful and scary, and a lot of people didn't understand. They'd say, well, why don't you just raise him? And even throwing out abortion and different things. Like, adoption was such a terrible thing. And adoption is such a beautiful thing. And I feel like because I made that decision and I was able to make a decision to turn my will and my life over in that moment, that the Lord has carried me and blessed me. And it's been a ripple effect, the last 17 years of my life. I still continue to use, though. It was still painful, even though I knew it was right. And so that really, I just spiraled my addiction even more. And I started using even heavier. And I was married. I had 2 more kids. I moved to Utah because I thought, well, that will solve everything, I'll move. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to buy a minivan, because I see these moms driving minivans and they look like really good moms. And so I'm like, I'm going to move to Utah and I'm going to drive a minivan and I'm going to be married and I'm going to do these things. And then I will be good. Then I will be good if I can do these things. And what I discovered is nothing on the outside is going to make me good. And really, we are good. it's about finding our goodness and letting the Lord show us. But that was something that had to evolve for many years to come. And those are real stories too. I really did do those things with that really in mind too. And so I ended up going to treatment, and this was probably my 6th or 7th time. I got separated, moved back to California, left my, I want to say, a year-old and 2.5-year-old babies with my ex-husband at the time, and he raised them for a little bit. I was going for treatment, so the intention was to come back. But when I was in treatment, I met a guy, and we had decided to get divorced. And I don't know the order really. I think the divorce did come first. But the relationship with guys, that's always been something that has come up and has always preceded my addiction. Is my relationship with men, my desire to belong, my desire to be approved of.
Have an attachment.
Yeah.
Because the divorce with your parents, all of a sudden there's no secure attachment. You're like in limbo trying to find that bond again with someone. Yeah. It makes total sense.
Yeah.
Desperate. I think just desperate to feel.
Yeah, we all need that.
Yeah. And you hear about that with pornography addiction. It's so true that it's a replacement for connection. We desire to connect, and they say that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, but it's connection. And I feel like that's true, and that's what I was always seeking. And same thing with the drugs for me, is it was, in a sense, kind of connection as well, and it was something to rely on, kind of like a toddler with a baby blanket, like a blankie that he carries around.
Or a pacifier.
Yeah. That was my pacifier that I would go to when things were too hard.
Lindsay, let's jump ahead a little bit. How did you finally find that long-term sobriety?
Yes. So when I was down there, things fell apart. And I ended up homeless and got arrested. And I call those police officers my guardian angels, though, because they intervened, and truly. And I went to jail, and jail was just amazing. Who knew? I say that, and, everybody laughs, and I laugh too. But truly, it was a miracle. And when the first day I was in there, they said, this is God's hospital. And I said, no, what are you talking about? And they said, no, this is God's hospital. And I said, okay, all right. And I remember I had been fighting it. I did not want to be there. And I called my dad, one of my few phone calls, and I said, when I get out of here, I'm leaving. I'm going back to my addiction. I'm done. I hate this. I hate everybody. Blame. But I had a really amazing experience in there. And this guy that I had met in a previous 12-step meeting came in and shared a story. And I knew that the Lord knew me. And I knew that he was aware of me, and from that moment on, I was willing to do what he wanted me to do. And
that must have been a profound experience for you.
Yes.
Wow.
Jail was super, super profound. That was the biggest pivotal time in my recovery.
So Lindsay, this is a time where it sounds to me where you says, okay, it's time for me to turn my life and my will over.
Yeah.
It took a lot of hard knocks, similar to what Christy went through, what we went through, and why it's so sacred. Step 3 is so sacred to you. It gets to the point to where you just say, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Is that what happened here? Why all of a sudden was from, I'm going to get out and do it my way, to, okay, I want and will do it. Yeah. I'm going to turn my life over.
I'm going to do it your way.
Yeah. What happened there?
I just was so angry. I was angry. I was alone again. I was, I was detoxing. I was just miserable, and I was mad. And I just remember blaming everybody. I'm like, it's my counselor's fault in treatment because she told me to go to court, and I went to court, and then I got arrested and got put in jail. So it's her fault. It's the judge's fault for sentencing me. It's my dad's fault for sending me to Utah. It's the cop's fault for arresting me. And I think that the Lord just intervenes, and I feel like it's only through him and his tender mercies that were able to kind of have those moments, because there's really nothing that I did other than I just felt the Spirit really strongly. And I remember looking around in the jail, and I'm like, okay, well, the judge isn't here, my counselor's not here, my dad's not here. I'm the only one here. So this is me, and this is on me now, and I've got to do this. And I...
Like, at that point, did you have any kind of relationship with God? Like, were you able to pray or anything like that?
Yeah,
nothing yet. Nothing yet.
I mean, I always knew He was there, and I always knew, I knew He was there. Mm-hmm. And I do feel like I was blessed to have a pretty strong testimony of that, but I didn't know He was there for me. Oh, and I was very ashamed.
Okay.
And
so not yet. No. Yeah. Okay.
And then how long after that experience did you get into treatment and then gain your long-term sobriety?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I spent a couple months there, and then I went straight to treatment, and that was in 2010. And I
is that the French?
That was called called the Ark.
Okay.
They're no longer around.
Okay.
But it was an amazing experience for me, and I was pretty much willing to do whatever they wanted at that point. Because of jail, I didn't want to go back. I was pretty grateful to be at such a beautiful place. But it was hard, and I fought a lot of it still, and but it was a process, and I just continued to plug forward, and I had these little spiritual experiences there. I mean, when I was graduating, this is a tiny thing, but I wanted to invite my missionaries that had been visiting me, or that had been coming in the jail and teaching classes, and because they would bring church and different things, and I wanted to invite all of them. And there was one specifically I could not remember, and I could see his face, and I could not remember his name, and I prayed, and his name just popped in my head as soon as I said amen. And I don't think I've had a prayer answered like that since then, but in that moment, the Lord knew that's what I needed. And it just testified to me that the Lord knows me, and even the littlest things that are important to me are important to Him. And I've just had moments like that. I was, married before him, and he was struggling with pornography addiction. And I was sober, but I was miserable. And I hated myself, and I thought it was my fault, and I was terrible, and I wasn't good enough. And, back to the alone, not connected, not good enough, not belonging. And so it triggered me a lot.
So his addiction caused pain for you?
Yeah. And caused a lot of my own unhealthiness, like coming back. And I actually, I've cutted 2 or 3 times ever in my whole entire life. And I know a lot of people have struggled with cutting addictions, and I understand why. When I was in that much pain, I knew drugs weren't the answer. But I'm like, I have to do something to relieve this. Right. And so I turned to that. And, I mean, that's how terrible it was. And I remember he decided to go to treatment. And I was driving home, and I was just in tears and sobbing and thinking I had my kids. They were little. They were 2 and 3 years old. How am I going to do this? How am I going to be a mom? How am I going to be okay? And I was talking to my friend on the phone, and I'm like, why does nobody care? I felt like nobody cared. Why doesn't somebody do something? Why doesn't somebody call me? Nobody cares. And I was saying these things, and they just told me, they said, Lindsay, they all do care, but they just don't know what to do. And in that moment, I just felt the Spirit so strongly touch me and say, nobody can help you. Nobody can save you except for your Savior. And in that moment, I knew that I had to turn things over to Him, and I couldn't look to Him for my rescuing and my saving, which is what our relationship had become. And so, yeah.
You mean you couldn't look to your boyfriend? You had to
with my husband at the time, yeah.
Your husband, You need to look to the Lord. Wow. Yeah. Wow.
Because he was doing the pornography.
So when did you find the long-term sobriety piece? Like you're I hear you're like there's the addiction, and they say that addiction's just that's not the problem.
Yeah.
It's the underlying causes and conditions, which I've heard so many of you. Yeah. How did you get that long-term? Like when did you get to that point where you had that long-term?
Okay. And that marriage, I mean, I was sober during that whole time too, so that was part of it. But I mean, the long-term, how I did it was, jail and treatment, but praying and journaling and working the steps and working them again and going to meetings and having a home group. I had a meeting every Friday that I went to, and I knew every single person that was in there, and I always felt welcome, and that they knew me, and I knew them. I was
Awesome.
accountable, and I always felt the spirit there.
And then you went to school, didn't you? And got some counseling, got your substance abuse disorder counseling, right?
So I went back to school and did that, and became a counselor, and worked at treatment centers.
You're also surrounded by people in recovery and supporting each other. And have a lot of amazing friends.
And you did lose your kids for a while, right? Your children. Oh my gosh. Yeah, too, because of the addiction, right? And what was your addiction at that point, would you say?
My drug of choice was heroin, but like you said, it's a symptom, and I think my main addiction was, approval and men, really, approval.
Yeah, approval.
And codependency.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were gone for a couple years when I was using and away and in treatment. And
About
doing
how
all
old
those
were you at
things.
this time?
I was about 25 to 27.
Wow.
So
This has got to
Liz?
give so much hope to our listening audience, because I know a lot of you have loved ones who struggle with addiction and who get to the point where, addiction is chronic, it's progressive, and it sadly can be very fatal. But you have loved ones and you see that they can't take care of their children. And that's how powerful this disease is. I mean, with the brain. I mean, it just gets to the point where it becomes like air. Like you have to have air. It's the number one thing you think about, right? I mean, that's what I've heard from so many people.
but there is
survive.
great hope. How many years have you been sober now?
I've been in recovery for 11 years, since April 2010.
Wow.
So we
Good
can
for
never
you.
give up hope for our loved one.
Yeah.
And
And I bet that was a happy day when you got your kids back.
Oh, yes. I mean, it was amazing. And it's so amazing, let me just add, to go from that place, from calling them from a jail cell. And when I was in treatment, I didn't know what to do, so I draw these little pictures for them. To now being able to be their mom and to suit up and to show up and to tell them, okay, I'm going to go out for a couple hours, I'll be home in a little bit. And to say goodnight to them every night is a miracle and a blessing from recovery, for sure. And from the
Now,
Lord.
you and Terry, tell about how you met Terry. How long have you guys been together now?
So we met about 4.5 years ago. We met about, I guess, 5.5 years ago. And we...
Almost.
Right? 5.
4 and 9.
Okay. 4 and 9.
4 years, 9 months.
Okay. And he had. We're
Sorry.
gonna get to your story now, but together now you have 6, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I see you getting a little emotional hearing Lindsay's story. That was really beautiful for me to watch that, Terry.
Yeah.
That was really beautiful.
Terry, what hit you? Why did you get emotional?
I'd love
and
to
then
hear
and
your
then share
story.
us your story.
Oh.
I don't even know if I can say it.
Oh.
I just love her so much.
She's been through a lot. She's climbed some Mount Everest mountains.
You guys have got to come to Terry and Lindsay's family groups on Thursday night.
Yes.
They're an amazing couple. Have so much experience to bring. And
I
they're
know.
doing their own blended family podcast, which is super cool too.
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean,
All
it's my manifestation of the Lord, and His saving grace, and because I feel like she saved me in a lot of ways. She has like truly saved me in so many ways. I hurt for her sometimes, and it pains me to think that she had such a hard life, and self-inflicted, but really, like, it's not really self-inflicted. And the things I'm learning about what we do as parents and how we raise our children. When you leave your kid alone for hours and hours, it's traumatizing, you know, and they don't know where, they don't think they have a place in this world when you leave them that long. I just love her, and I'm just really grateful for her. Can't even look at you. I'm just grateful for her.
That's awesome.
Beautiful.
So Terry,
It's
share with us
beautiful.
your story of recovery. Because of time, we're gonna have to condense it a little bit. Try to do it in about 10 minutes or so.
Sure.
But share with us from the heart what you went through, why you think you struggled, and then your recovery and hope.
Well, when Lindsay and I first got together, I used to talk about, first 3.5 years, really. I used to tell her, I had the greatest childhood, Saturday morning cartoons. I was at my friends all the time. We had a trampoline in the back and a swing set. I had 2 brothers, 2 sisters. We actually played together quite a bit as really young, and I just had a great childhood. And I got to kindergarten, and I was obsessed with girls. I didn't know why. I didn't even think about it. I thought everybody was. I don't even remember my first kiss, because that was what I was pursuing my entire life, and it consumed me like most of my life, and I didn't even know why. Everything I did was for girls, but then I was afraid of them too. I also pitied them, and I looked at them as objects. It'll only make me feel good. So my sexual addiction started when I was like 7 or 8 years old. And when I was probably 9 or 10, during that time, my parents didn't have stuff in the house, none of that, like pornography or anything like that. But sometimes we'd come across it at my friends' houses, and it wasn't like me just looking at a picture. It was like I was like paralyzed. So anyways, fast forward about till I was maybe 10 years old. My friend had found, I was 9 or 10, not sure exactly. It's hard to put things together back then, but anyways, we came across, my friend found a pornographic film on a VHS, and he brought it to our house when my parents were gone, and we didn't know what it was. He didn't say anything on it, and so we threw it in, and my friend was 4 years younger than I am at this time, and he watched it with us as well, and I was overcome by what was, and we were all laughing at it, but inside I was just like, what is this? And it was just another contributor to me being obsessed. And that obsession, came thoughts of like terrible thoughts of girls, and as the years went by, I never really saw a lot of visuals and stuff like that. I didn't see a lot of them. I'd see them every now and again at a friend's house or something. But I had this sexual addiction every single day, and So, I got to the point where I had so much shame about myself that I didn't want to go to church anymore. I didn't want anything to do with it. I could feel myself going numb. I was getting in fights all the time. When these fights started protecting girls. And then later on it became my signature of who I was. Like, I wanted every man I wanted everyone to be afraid of me. And I wanted every woman or girl to want me. And that was just, it literally consumed my life. I mean, when I'd go to football or working out and stuff like that, I was working out to get girls. I was playing football to get girls. And then if I got a girlfriend, I'd stop working out because I reached my objective. Well, so I had this sexual addiction, and then so I took seminary 9th grade. Completely changed my life because I was like so embarrassed to go. Because for anybody to think I was religious, right? And then that changed my life, and I just kept thinking, wow, I love this. I stopped swearing. I still had my sexual addiction. But then in 11th grade, and I'm not promoting anything, however, that was the first time I picked up the Book of Mormon and began reading it. And
so you're kind of getting spiritual, like your eyes are starting to get open a little bit spiritually, but you're still struggling with the addiction.
Yeah, and
that brings a lot of shame, right?
Yeah, and then it was the first, like, going to seminary was the first time I felt what love was. And because I never felt loved, and I never felt like I could love. I always thought I did, and there was a perception of, what love looked like. But it was the only time that I ever felt filled to where I just wanted to give and could give. And so I read the Book of Mormon. I didn't read all of it, but I read a whole bunch of it. And I remember every night praying before I'd read, like, I had questions, and that was my worst year, I thought, ever, in 11th grade. And every single night I would read verse, sometimes pages, and I always got an answer to every single one of my prayers.
Wow.
And it was not one was missed. And anyhow, and I had this deep desire to serve the Lord. So I still have the sexual addiction all this time, and I'm shaming myself even more. The more spiritual and closer I came with the Lord, the more shame I felt, my unworthiness. And come to the time that I wanted to go on a mission, and the stake president told me, "You've got to stop." And amazing the way the Lord works, because I all of a sudden didn't have any desire from that time forward. So for 4 years, on my mission and afterward.
Now, when you say mission, there's a lot of people listening out there may not understand.
Oh, so 2 years.
2-year mission.
Served a mission.
Where did you go?
Scotland.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really amazing. And terrible at the same time. But no, it was really amazing. It changed my life. But so about 4 years, never had a desire, and then I got married. And I thought, and it's crazy because I was always reading my scripture that was very spiritual. I never saw myself as religious. I always saw myself as just, I love the Lord. Like, I didn't put a label on it, you know.
That divine connection, really.
Yeah, I just felt like it was natural, it's supposed to be. And I never really thought of it that way either. Until now. So anyways, I got married, and we had a terrible marriage. I mean, really terrible. And up to this time, I'm still objectifying every woman that comes in my life. In fact, I objectified every person that came into my life. And it was a way to protect myself, you know. I wanted to make everybody laugh and feel good and please everyone, and especially girls, especially women, mostly older women, which I know why now, but that's just what my desire, you know. And anyway, so we get married. Terrible marriage, it's like horrible from the beginning. And she is a good person. Let me just state that. We just grinded all the time, you know. And so it would be months at a time between when we'd have sex. So during that time, like, what was the easy way? I wanted to feel connection. I wanted to feel significant. I wanted to feel certainty and uncertainty. I wanted to feel those needs that I longed for. I wanted to feel like I was attractive, like I've always did my whole life. That's how I felt. But I also hated myself the whole time. And I didn't see. I never saw that until less than a year ago. Now, 7 months ago. I never knew that I hated myself. I never knew that I had anxiety, and it was all surrounded about this addiction around women, around girls.
So how did you get to the point where you started to feel some sobriety and feel like you were starting to get healthy and healing and all of that?
So we were married for 13 years.
Wow.
Almost 13 years. It was like a few months shy.
Okay.
And a year and a half, almost 2 years before we got divorced, I got really depressed. And she started drinking at this time too. And I just fell apart. And so I let my values go. She let her values go. And like pornography was just like a go-to. It was like, you know, oh, you're gonna not watch cartoons, let's just throw on some, you know, for me. Eventually I got so depressed that I literally scheduled my day around sleeping. I was so down. And I was just telling Lindsay, like, during that time, I didn't want to kill myself, but I didn't really care if I lived. And I remember my daughter, at the time she was in kindergarten, and every morning she wanted to play, and I would fall asleep, and she would get so mad. And her feelings got hurt so many times. Anyway, so get to recovery, right? So so I got to the point, and this was almost 6 months, and then I was so desperate. I didn't know what to do anymore, and I was just like at the end of my rope. I mean, I wasn't suicidal ever, but I was so down that I just didn't know what to do anymore. I felt like I was in space without any thruster and no way to move. And I just felt like I can't do this anymore. And it got to the point where step one, like I just was like, my life is completely unmanageable. I cannot do this.
Okay.
And I went to a friend, and I said, I told him, I'm so grateful for him. I love him so much. So I went to him and I was like, I heard you had a tough marriage. How did you deal with a wife that's just, hates you? And he saw right through me. He knew exactly what I was going through. And for the next year, he spent 1, 2, 3, 4 hours every single day, Monday through Friday with me.
Like a sponsor type of thing?
Oh my gosh. He was with me. He was right next to me because he was working with me.
Wow.
But we'd sit in his car.
Oh.
And he would just talk to me.
Oh, wow.
And it was part of the grace that the Lord shows to us. I didn't know I was going to cry so much.
Yeah, but he works through other people.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so that was the beginning. And so about 7-8 months later, through him working with me, and again, he stayed with me for a year, every single day, 5 days a week.
Wow.
He sat with me and just, sometimes he had to comfort me when I was crying and stuff. And anyhow, I all of a sudden didn't have a desire to, and I think that because I made the decision that I want the Lord in my life and I want him to take over, that's when pornography just stopped being a burden for me. And I did it out of anger most of the time. So there was an attachment to this anger, what to do with it.
Wow.
And then about 6 months later, I divorced her and found the most wonderful woman on planet Earth.
And I know that you two guys have been working really hard together as well as a couple. Like you guys work the steps together, and you each work your own recovery. And don't you work at a treatment center as well?
So I did for a little
Do some
bit. I wish I
volunteering.
was still.
Yeah.
So if there's any
cool.
marketing or anything like that, just
Well, in the interest of time, I mean,
Yeah.
you both have been very vulnerable and very helpful. There are so many people out there that don't understand this connection, that as human beings we are wired for this bonding, this connection. And if it's okay, I mean, I still want to hear more, but if we can maybe pull Mark in,
awesome.
just with the time that we've got, I would love so much to hear a little bit of your background, but a lot of your knowledge, because we want to just get into this dialogue. And I think it's so important that people understand pornography is an addiction, just like the heroin, right? But it's really about the relation. It's really about this core need of this
Human
The
connection.
hole in the soul. You
hole
can
in
see
the
with
soul,
both those.
the connection. And
Yeah.
it just like what was interesting for me, and you can comment on this, is you had always felt like you needed some kind of an attachment. You always felt like you were not getting that. That's why you wanted that with the girls, right?
Yeah.
But then even when you had your friend, and that's what I've seen from the last 15 years, we've had an opportunity to facilitate 12-step meetings. How many times do you hear, when I finally had this good friend or a mom or a dad or a
Connection.
brother or a sister to kind of be my support person, I could actually start healing.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? Talk about that a little bit, and then tell us a little bit of your story.
Yeah. No, Terry and Lindsay, thank you for sharing that. That's like super vulnerable. I really appreciated that. And it's really important for everybody listening. If you notice these two, you can tell that you're just welded. I mean, it's the word that I've
So
learned over the
beautiful.
years. We come in our brokenness, and we think that we're never going to find anybody that we could ever deserve or that would ever want us or desire us. And yet through all the chaos, you found each other. And now because of everything you've been through, you cannot, you could drop an atomic bomb on the two of you and you would not come apart.
No.
Right?
No way.
I know. You said there's no way.
It's true.
And it's so amazing how
They
you see
are.
that.
Yeah.
And I think it's because you've come from a place where you had this hole inside of you that just wanted to belong and to feel like you were worthy and that you mattered, and this whole yearning so much of your lives. And then you both started to get healthy, and that's so important. That's why we want to get healthy in our own recovery and healing, and then those two parallel paths, as we get healthier and healthier, come together, and then we just weld, and now you have that connection that you always longed for, and you have it, and you can see it
and feel it,
and it doesn't just fill you up.
Yes.
Yes, it
And
does.
the peace, like it's just so beautiful to feel the peace.
So
that they
amazing.
both
Amazing
have.
for sure.
Yeah, it's amazing to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just gives, everyone should have hope. You're not a lost cause. Nothing's impossible, right? If you can find each other through everything you described, right? There is a higher power that knows us and is navigating and orchestrating even when we don't realize it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's so awesome.
But
I
it
love
seems
that.
like the second we turn our thoughts to Him, like He's there. You know, as soon as we just
When
are
we're ready.
willing.
We're
yeah,
ready
to go.
we're ready. Yeah.
So, Mark, a little of your story. This-
a little of my story. So I was born to a teenage mom who had a very tragic life. My mother. She's actually one of my heroes today. And so I had a really rough childhood. It was pretty bad. A lot of string of very abusive stepfathers, and just always my whole growing up, I just felt completely unworthy all the time. I don't measure up. I'm not one of the good ones. I'll never amount to anything. And I just had this horrible, terrible self-image from as far back as I can remember. And so I grew up in the pornography production capital of the world, the San Fernando Valley, California. And so was exposed really young. And that immediately became my attachment. From the very first time I was exposed, I tell people I was hooked from the
You hear that a lot.
first experience.
Yep.
I felt something that was just like, wow, this is what I've been longing for, right?
Yeah.
This is what I've been needing. And so from that point forward, it was just, I was gone. And I didn't do anything in my teenage years to do anything about it. The more I could get, the better it was, because it filled me. I felt good temporarily. And through a bunch of miracles I won't talk about, I actually did go on a mission from my church, which was, people were shocked. Like, aren't you
Where
going
did
on a
you
mission?
go?
So
Where did you go?
I went to Australia,
Okay,
Nice.
wow.
down to Australia,
That's awesome.
and had a pretty successful. I mean, I had a lot of issues, and it was very hard. And came home and got married pretty quickly. I met my wife before I left. And I thought, that part of my life is done. I'm married, everything's awesome, I'm good to go. And about 6 months into my marriage, I had a child on the way, full-time job, full-time school, callings in my church. Pressure was unbelievable. And where did my brain go? I call it, run home to mama. And I went back to what I learned as a teen. You go when you're stressed out and life is unmanageable, you run to your drug of choice.
Yeah.
So I fell right back into it, just headlong. And I kept it a secret from everyone, including my wife, because I was so scared that if anyone found out, that my life was over. No one would ever love or accept me if they knew the kinds of things, the behaviors that I was engaging in. And so that was 25 years after my marriage. Wow. Add to that the 8, 9, 10 years as a kid. So we're talking a 30 plus, 35-year addiction. And so I became so hopeless, the roller coaster ride, and I was convinced I couldn't ask for help because no one could know. So I went it alone, right? Talk about not living the steps. So I couldn't tell anyone because that was unthinkable.
Yeah.
So I tried everything you can imagine, and I just kept falling back over and over. And so I came really close. I had a gun in my hand, and I was really close to pulling the trigger. And God was aware of me and kind of pulled me out of that a little bit. And so through a series of events, being the, nobody who's watching that has addiction knows about black or white thinking or all or nothing, but that was me. So I had a pretty successful career in the financial field, and I said, if I'm going to do this, I have to go all in. So I left my entire career, to my wife's chagrin, and I jumped into the mental health field and changed my entire profession. And
That
said,
has
I've
blessed
got to do
many
this.
lives. I know many
Oh, thank
people
you.
have.
And the thing is, just because I did that, I wasn't cured. It took me 10 years, even after I had written books and had credentials, and I was still not permanently sober. It took another decade for me to work through the whole thing. And so it's been a really, really long road for me. I tell my clients, of all the people I've ever treated for sexual addiction, I have one of the most severe that I know of.
Severe
Is my
cases.
own.
Wow.
And all the mental health issues, I've had, bipolar, depression, anxiety, Tourette's. All of it I've suffered from it over my lifetime.
Yeah.
So
So
Well,
Mark, I've got, what's interesting is we listened to both Terry and Lindsay. When they were young, I thought it was interesting because Lindsay, she didn't have, she was not sexually abused,
yeah.
physically abused. Terry, the same thing. But the thread of consistency here was, remember what Terry says, I didn't feel loved.
I was actually, so I was spanked. But the one thing that, and this is kind of like covert stuff, but my mom would actually take a stick or a spoon, and so she would just put us in a room, and she would kind of cool off, and then she'd come in and spank us 3 times. But she would have us pull down our pants. And what we're learning now, it's not, it's actually sexual abuse by doing something like that. And it's humiliating, and
And I'm sure she had no idea.
she had no idea.
Right. Yeah.
But
She's doing what she was taught.
Yeah.
That's
that generational thing.
That's to my point. Is that Terry says, I never felt love, even through, his teenage years, let alone when he was young. When that love isn't felt, that means there's no connection. As human beings, we are yearning for connection, and we'll go after it one way or the other.
Right.
There's consistency in both their stories. With you as well, you weren't good enough. There was not. It seemed like love or connection at home.
No.
And so maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
And question, and how did your marriage survive through all of this?
Because my wife is the most amazing person on the planet.
Yeah, and maybe can you talk
You married one too, huh?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the women, what the wives go through? Because I know you have a really cool thing where with your partner, Stephen Moore, you guys do like 3 times a week. Like the first Monday or whatever, you meet with the individual. Wednesday you meet with the wife, the spouse, and then you meet with the couple. So it's kind of cool. It's like this couple therapy with 2 it's a cool program that you have. But talk a little bit about betrayal trauma, because I know we have a lot of wives listening who are dealing with that, and your wife, her perspective. I'd like to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because if you look at what we suffer with as addiction, we have all of our insecurities and this hole in our soul, as you said, Rick, which is so accurate. And in a lot of times there's so much attention on the addict that the spouse gets left behind, just sort of in the background. And she thinks, well, what about me? What about my needs? What about what I'm going through? In a lot of ways, the symptoms of addiction can actually be seen in betrayal trauma symptoms as well. The cause is different, but you have the same feelings of inadequacy and, I don't measure up, and you feel like you're going crazy, and just all of these things hit you. And especially with sexual addiction and pornography addiction, women suffer horribly. I mean, look at the culture that we live in. It's all about comparison. And imagine if you know that your husband is involved, in seeing all of these airbrushed perfect women, by the thousands and unlimited numbers, and then there's you.
Right.
You cannot help but feel this comparison
Inadequate.
and inadequacy. And so I see women who they first will take ownership of that. Maybe I'm not good enough or demonstrative enough or responsive enough, so they start feeling that way. There's often anger, legitimately so. It's this incredible emotional variability, a roller coaster ride as we call it.
Right.
And it's just so important for women to understand that the addict's getting help in recovery, but a spouse needs to have her healing journey. And women will ask me, what's my priority? And they think it's my husband, right? I got to help him. I got to step in and bless their hearts for being nurturers to do so. But he has to be responsible for his recovery. And I tell women, your first responsibility is to your well-being and your healing and taking care of you.
Right.
And then hopefully, if you're both traveling that path, as I said, you will come back together at some point, as these two have.
And I think it's important for women to realize too that I think sometimes we may think, I know with my son, I can't tell anybody about this because then I'm not being loyal. And then that prevents them from getting the help that they need for their own mental well-being, And so it's really important that I am so grateful that my son one time, I said, I feel like I need to talk to people about this. And he said, I'm realizing that I'm just like everybody else and that I make mistakes and it's okay it's okay for you to share or get help for you. I really appreciated that when my son told me to do that.
Well, and a lot of women, we may not realize this, but a lot of women have shame because of their husband's addiction.
Right.
They don't want people to know.
Right.
Who wants to tell someone, oh, I'm married to a sex addict?
Yeah.
It's very awkward and embarrassing, and so women have great struggles to get help as well. Yeah. And they start to think, look at me. I married this guy. How dumb was I? And why didn't I see? And how come I didn't notice along the way?
And then it's like it almost becomes yours as a woman. It almost becomes yours because it's like I'm letting it happen. That means that I must be terrible. That means that I must be
Or you start taking it so personal.
just as sick and
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I will tell you though, on a positive side, so with our church, we have the opportunity to do all these meetings, and some of them that we were facilitating was with he would go with the pornography meeting, right, and I would get to go with the wives. I have never seen stronger women than those women who are in a marriage with their husband struggling with their pornography or sex addiction.
No question.
And they decide, you know what, I'm going to take care of me. And they start working their steps, and they get a group, and they get a sponsor. Really important to get that sponsor. And they are the strongest women, and they find peace. They find this peace. And I have a really good friend whose husband had a 32-year addiction, and she kept thinking any day, I think God's going to tell me to divorce him. And every day she kept feeling like, just hang on one more day, one more day. And then they discovered the 12 steps, and he's got like 10 years sobriety, and then they wrote this book together, and they're the happiest, most welded couple ever.
Comes this welding
and so
again.
It seems like when the wife can work her part and he works his part, that's the strongest marriage I've ever seen. It's truly amazing.
Mark,
so true.
What you said a minute ago was, I was in this addiction, and I just couldn't tell anybody because, my whole life would be judged. It would all fall apart. And so I've got to go to my grave with this. I got to go it alone.
Exactly.
And the principle here is we're only as sick as our secrets. It seems that when we're secret about it, that's when the addiction thrives and the talents just have us. But when we open up, that's when the talents loosen. Can you talk a little bit to that?
Yeah, I actually had a really pivotal experience. I had a business partner when I was in the financial field, and he didn't know I had an addiction, but he suspected something was up. And I was in his office one day, and when we come off of our addiction binge, we go into this pity party, wallowing place, self-flogging, right? So I was just, woe is me, I'm such a loser, and I was just pouring it out on him. And I thought he's just going to be so compassionate. And he looked me straight in the eye, and he said, He said, you think that your sins are so special that you're the only one that Jesus didn't suffer for? He said, you're arrogant and you need to repent.
Wow.
And I was like,
That's
how
kinda awesome.
dare you, right? And I stomped out of his office, and I was just so mad, and it took me like 3 days. And after I really thought about it, I thought, wow, he's right. I thought I was in sackcloth and ashes and being all humble, and what I was really being was prideful. And that's when I started to learn about the first 3 steps, which was we have to move from me by myself in my pride and my fear and my shame. Those are all so closely connected, right? Pride, fear, shame. I have to move from me to we. And I have to admit, as step 1 says, I will never overcome this by myself, ever. And it took me 30 plus years to finally admit that. Mm-hmm. I was so broken and so done. I finally said uncle. Like a kid's got you in a headlock and you won't, he says, cry uncle, say uncle. And I finally did. I'm like, okay, God, uncle.
And then you go to the we part. How does that work?
Then you go to we and you say, okay, I can't do it, but maybe we can. And when I say we, I mean, of course, God, but then we surround ourselves with a support system. Like you had, isn't that? I mean, it's just so critical. And I thought for most of my life, okay, I'll call on God, but only after I earn my way back into his grace or circle by so many days of sobriety, or once I've done this.
To get good enough, then I can approach him.
I can approach him.
Yeah.
And it was just never going to succeed. And I love step 3 because what it says to me is, basically here's, in my faith tradition, here's Jesus Christ with his arm out, my whole life, just saying, Mark, I'm waiting for you to grab hold. I'm waiting for you to grab hold. And I'm saying, I can't because I'm not good enough. I haven't earned it yet. And then finally one day I'm just like, okay, right? And I grab hold, and I felt so ridiculous because I suddenly realized, do you mean to tell me that there has been this power source right there? All I had to do was plug myself into it, and it was waiting my whole life.
Yeah.
And I went it alone all those decades.
Yeah.
I was like, what?
Right?
It was right there,
Yeah.
with no conditions, nothing except saying, I'm open.
I'm here.
I know.
And truly, once you feel that tender mercy and you feel that connection, it's like emotional electricity. You gotta have it. You can't live without it. You can't deny it. It's like real.
So, Mark, let me ask you this.
So cool. Thank you. I
Step
love
3
that.
is turning our will and our life over.
Yes.
If you think about it, anything that we can give our higher power, anything that we could give our Heavenly Father, He already has. Mm-hmm. If you think of anything, there's nothing we could try to give Him that He doesn't already have, except one thing, our will, turning our will over. In your opinion, why is that step 3? Why is that so important that without doing it, we can't progress in maintain or of having long-term sobriety?
Yeah, I have some pretty strong feelings about that. I think that the thing that God or our higher power values above all else is choice. Mm-hmm. He will not force us to do anything. He wants us to choose, because that's what it's in the best interest of our growth and our development. So He will not make us turn to Him. And so he'll of course bring about circumstances that will certainly nudge us sometimes very strongly in that direction. But I think that He's waiting for us to say, okay, I invite you. I'm willing. I'm giving my will to you, so that now we, instead of me being by myself, we can partner together. Right? I love Christ's invitation where He says, come all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Mm-hmm. And we know a yoke, right? This big wooden structure with the 2 oxen. And Christ is saying, right, join with me, like literally yoke yourself to me, and together we will do this. And that's where I learned what surrender meant. So I'm in this moment as an addict, life is unmanageable, and my ego brain says, "Oh, I know the solution." You hear the word I know the solution, and we go to our outlet. Now in surrender, I say, "Oh God, there's part of me that wants to just do it my way, but I'm going to surrender that over to you. It's off the table." And a lot of people will go that far, but that's only half the equation. Giving that part away is great, but then I ask, okay, I'm feeling this because I have needs. We misinterpret urges and these things as bad. They just say, I have needs and I have to meet them. So I give that part away and I say, okay, God, that's off the table. What do I need most in this moment? What do you think? And impressions come and little insights come.
Yeah.
And then you act on them. Yeah. See, that's not willpower, because willpower doesn't work. It wears you out and you give in. I call those little acts of the will. God says, make a choice, Mark, in this moment. And I say, okay, God, what do I need? He says, how about this? Act of the will, and I go and I pursue it. That's surrender. That's partnership.
Yeah.
That's step 3.
It is.
Give that to him so he can now come and join with you, and together you will travel that path.
Right, right. I feel like to say something about accountability too. Like I've heard so many over the years through the meetings talk about how helpful it's been to have an accountability like sponsor person with pornography and sex addiction, and how critical that is, because it is a powerful addiction, and it is the most shaming of addictions. Like it's the one that people are going to be least likely to talk about, which as soon as you can talk about it and just find that group, find a special group, 12-step pornography group, whatever group you're finding, where you can open up and you can talk about things and have those friends that can help you. I mean,
not only that,
that sounded like that was just what it took for you, was just to have that accountability.
and a spouse, like if you have a spouse that you feel safe with,
yes,
oh my gosh,
yeah,
and that's why I say, like, she's part of my saving, is that because she's my spouse,
right?
And when I am transparent with her, those needs become filled, because I'm vulnerable now, and I let her in. I let her give me the comfort that I needed in the first place. Same with her when she comes to me and is telling me her feelings, and I can actually comfort her. I give her a little but that's what she needs sometimes.
Wow.
Because she never got that.
Yeah.
When she was young.
A husband and wife, like a marriage, I think, can be one of the most powerful, the most powerful place to heal and to do the work and to transform.
And a very trusting partnership. Yeah.
It can be. It doesn't necessarily always like that, but if you can get to that point, I think it can just be so transforming.
Well, you know what you just said is, and Terry, what you just said is that if you feel safe, I remember when we were going through family education, and we were taught that emotional dishonest families is where addiction just thrives. And emotional dishonesty, what exactly is that?
I think we talked about that last podcast.
But the idea is, you're not feeling safe. You're not sharing your true feelings. You don't feel connected. You feel alone. That's a difficult place to be. And I look at you guys now. You've been there, done that. But now in this marriage, you're so vulnerable with each other, because you're both safe, because you've both done the work. You've done the work.
And I learned that from you. I remember you talking about that.
And I just want to speak to the parents out there too, because as we learned this idea of creating a safe space, I know that in the beginning, before we started learning about recovery and started working our steps and recovering from codependent behaviors, for you parents out there, this is another reason why we encourage you to come to the family education classes. They're free. There's people in those classes like Lindsay and Terry who have years of experience with recovery, and it just helps you. I always learn something from someone a little farther ahead of me down the recovery path, you know. And I think our time is a little bit short, but I feel you have one last thing, and I want to hear it. There is. I appreciate, and we're going to have you on again. You've been so helpful, and I appreciate
maybe
it
you
so
can
much.
also, before we wrap up, share about your podcast and some things that would
And
really
how they
be helpful.
can connect with you
Yeah,
if
how
they
they
want to
can-
do
yeah.
some of the therapy stuff.
Yeah, we can do that real quick. So, Steve, my colleague Steve Moore, and I have a podcast that we do every week. It's you can find it at pbsepodcast.com, and it's PBSE stands for Porn, Betrayal, Sex, and the Experts.
I love it.
But we get super raw and real. He's also a sex addict in recovery, and we pretty much, people are amazed that we just say whatever we need to say. So,
like it.
Well,
so
I'm just-
pbsepodcast.com. And then we just launched 2 weeks ago, kind of a dream of ours. We wanted to provide to the world 2 therapists, you know, spending time with people in one big group online. You know,
It's a Zoom, right?
it's through, yeah, it's basically through a video broadcasting service.
Okay.
So Mondays we talk to addicts for 30 minutes, Wednesdays wives for 30 minutes, and Fridays the couples.
I love it.
And so it's daretoconnectnow.com.
I love it.
And
I love it.
it's not therapy, because you can't do therapy in that setting, but it's mentoring, it's getting raw and real, it's helping people. Either they can't access therapy, or they can't afford it, or they've been in therapy a long time and you can't stay there forever.
Right.
And they want to maintain, they want to
Right.
keep their trajectory. So we just
love it.
launched that. We're
I
super
love
excited
it.
about
And then
it.
if you want to work your 12 steps, which I think everybody in the whole world needs to work their 12 steps, you can work the 12 steps with Terry and Lindsay on Thursday night.
Yes.
Our social media site for family addiction recovery is called Addiction Recovery Mom, and that's on Instagram and Facebook. And we have webinars.
Well, our total 5 classes. We have classes. As you know, Terry and Lindsay, they do the Thursday night class, and
they're gonna
you
talk-
know
they're
you
gonna
know where
talk
they're
about-
coming from at this
yeah,
point.
they're gonna
You
talk
know
about the
their
hard issues.
their position. You know what they have to offer. If you're in need, or you know others, send them Thursday night, 6:30. And their life will
awesome.
change.
Yeah.
Christy and I do one every Wednesday night at 6:30.
The parents.
We have meetings or Zoom classes Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, and then a woman's only
Yes.
Thursday
Thursday
at noon, which is real special.
Which is really special. Yeah.
So wrap us up, Mark.
You wrap us
well,
up.
I can say something too. You go ahead.
Well, you know what I noticed about the two of you, we're scared to death when we're in addiction or betrayal trauma, whatever, to be vulnerable and authentic, to speak our truth, to show up. And have you been amazed that you've been able to actually do that? That you've been transparent and authentic with each other, and he accepts you like fully, and she accepts you fully.
Yeah.
And so that part of you that said that could never happen if I'm completely transparent, that wasn't true.
I know.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing.
Yeah. I was always embarrassed about everything.
Yeah.
And before I told you guys my story, I only told her my
Wow.
story. And I mean, that's probably why it was so hard for me. But yeah, like, she's the only person I've ever told everything to, and it's because and the fear that men have is, oh, she's gonna find me out,
Yeah.
and if she finds me out, she will leave.
Yep.
And and I found with her, like, and she's honest with me, because I can say, well, I feel this way, I feel inadequate, I feel like I feel stupid, and blah blah blah, you know. And she goes, I feel more safe now. And I'm like,
I know. Isn't
what?
that- I know. It
You
sounds,
feel safe because I feel inadequate? How is this?
It's amazing how that works, and I just love the fact that you modeled that tonight. Just
Yeah.
You modeled it
Yeah.
really beautifully
It's- yeah,
because
it's awesome.
men are in our culture are kind of socially taught not to share feelings
no,
and not
never.
not share emotion,
Never.
and in a way they need to feel like they're the protector and they want to protect their wife and protect their kids, and so it's hard for them to be authentic and be
It is.
vulnerable,
It
and
is.
yet that's what women love.
Yeah.
Women love that, you know. And sometimes he's like, So the man of the house and I'm like, oh, just tell me you're hurting. Tell me you're, and I do. You do feel so much closer when we can be emotionally honest with each other. But I'd like
So
to just
true.
end with one scripture, if I can, that just brought me so much peace. I know a lot of you are out there and your loved ones are not yet in recovery. You may not even know what recovery is, so you're taking a big chance with us tonight. But there was one thing that I share. I mean, almost every night when I had 2 sons that were struggling in their opioid heroin addiction, that I would say that would help me go to sleep. Brought me a lot of peace, and I would say it often throughout the day, many, many times, and it just goes like this, and it's my perfect step 3 scripture. But it's Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy path. So I hope that this podcast has been helpful for you guys. Thank you so much, Terry and Lindsay. I love you even more now. And you know, we've just been connected for 10 years since you did the outpatient program, and I'm just so happy. And
Getting to know you.
And
thank
Mark,
you,
thank
Mark.
you.
I love you
Thank
even
you
more
all.
than ever,
Yeah,
too.
my pleasure.
And I thought how tender it was when you had a teenage mom to hear her story that had to heal some pieces of your heart.
Yes. Yeah,
You
it's
know,
awesome.
Yeah.
I mean,
cool.
she, on the way, representing kind of like your mother, like what she
Yep.
went through, right? So,
Yeah, absolutely.
how special tonight! This is a
Yeah,
God
wonderful.
thing. We love it.
Hey,
Love you
join us in the
guys.
near future. We'll have step 4 out. Remember, you got to feel it to heal it. Please join us in the future. Thank you so much for spending the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.